Hello and welcome everyone to the Difference Makers Show, sponsored by Difference Makers Media. I'm Lynn Sanders, your host, and I am so glad you're here today. This is a historic program. The title is The Power of Cued Speech, Amazing Stories from a Mom and Her Deaf Daughter. Why is this historic? Well, many of you may never have heard of cued speech before. And it's a powerful tool that can transform the lives of deaf individuals and their families. Also, I feel it's very historic because you're going to be hearing amazing stories. And this is also the first time, I believe it's the first time anyway for me, where you're going to be able to access this program in 3 different ways: through speech, through cued speech transliteration, and through American Sign Language. So everyone, hearing or deaf, will be able to understand this program. And what's more, you're also going to be learning about a revolutionary new online program where anyone from around the world can learn to do cued speech. So before we start, I want to acknowledge our special colleagues who are helping us with this program. A big thanks to my friend Roland Takaoka, our wingman, who will be monitoring the comment stream. I also want to thank Lisa Gavin, who is our cued speech transliterator. And Lisa is the founder of Q4U, the first remote cued speech transliterating service for the deaf or hard of hearing. Lisa is a nationally certified CLT from Jacksonville, Florida. We also have Josh Garrett, who is our American Sign Language interpreter, and he is with Alternative Communication Services, providing remote captioning and signing services. And most of all, we have 2 special guests who I've known actually for over 20 years. I want to just tell you a very brief story. I met Sandy Mostick, and through her daughter Rachel, in a very roundabout way when I donated my writing services for a custom poem at our temple's fundraiser. The woman who picked up that gift is a woman who's a very famous person within the cued speech community, Marianne Lockman, who's no longer with us in person, but with us in spirit. And she asked me to write a custom poem for her son's bar mitzvah. When I asked her to tell me something about her son, she said, "I'm so proud of Ben. He's speaking in English and Hebrew at his bar mitzvah, and he's totally deaf." I was amazed and astonished. And I asked her, how is that possible? And she said, cued speech. So that leads us to Sandy and Rachel, 2 very special people. Sandy is served on the board of the National Cued Speech Association for 6 years and the board of the Alexander Graham Bell Montessori School in Wheeling, Illinois for over 25 years. She now volunteers extensively at the school, manages the Q College website development project, which you'll be hearing about later on today, and she's a certified instructor of cued speech. Her daughter Rachel McAnallen, is a deaf mother of 2 hearing children, and Rachel was born with a severe to profound bilateral hearing loss. And she's now a licensed professional engineer who develops national environmental policy for the Department of Defense. Rachel, besides that, has a unique perspective as someone who is comfortable using all the modes of communication that you're experiencing today in any given situation. She knows cueing, sign language, and oral communication. She uses 1 hearing aid and 1 cochlear implant and takes advantage of the many other kinds of technologies now available to better communicate and provide communication access for the deaf. So without further ado, let me welcome Sandy and Rachel. Sandy, would you like to say hello to us all?
Hi.
And Rachel, could you say hello to us all?
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. And also, I want everyone participating here, everyone listening, whether it's live or to the replay, to please make this meaningful by writing in your name and where you're hanging out from in the comment stream. I also strongly encourage you to type in questions or comments during the show so we can make it as participatory as possible. We want to help you get your questions answered and be able to make it a really meaningful program. So we're going to start out by asking a question to both Sandy and then to Rachel. How did you discover cued speech, Sandy? Tell us.
Well, you happened to mention Mary Ann Lackman. I was at a picnic for the Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf. I'd been invited because I was a parent of a newly diagnosed deaf child. And by the time I had come to that picnic, I had been signing to Rachel for 5 or 6 months. We had been told about sign language by the public school parent-infant program, and had been told that that was the natural language of the deaf and that we should sign to our daughter. And Mary Ann, seeing me signing to Rachel, asked me, have you thought about how your daughter is going to learn English? And I, for a moment, thought, and well, actually, I was speaking and signing, but of course she was deaf. And so the spoken English was not accessible to her. So I said, well, no, actually, I really don't know. And so she proceeded to tell me about cued speech, that this was a way to, it was easy to learn, and it involved 8 consonant hand shapes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, cued around 4 locations around the mouth that represent the vowels, and that you cue consonant vowel syllables as you speak, and then it makes all of the spoken English accessible to the deaf child. And she told me about an upcoming special seminar that was being taught by the inventor of cued speech, Dr. Orrin Cornett. It was about a month into the future, and Rachel's father and I went to that, and we learned all about cued speech and its benefits and how to do it.
Wonderful. And tell me, how did you feel about cued speech when you first learned about it, and how long did it take you to learn cued speech?
Well, I had been, like I said, actively learning to sign for 5 or 6 months and feeling very overwhelmed. First of all, it was a brand new language to me, as it is for 95% of deaf children have hearing parents. And so I felt very, very overwhelmed, like I was trying to communicate with my daughter and teach my daughter a language that I didn't even know. And I was told that she would probably never speak, and that I should lower my expectations for her academically. And so I had been very overwhelmed. And when I learned about the cued speech, I basically learned that it's easy to learn. The average person can learn it in just 10 to 20 hours of instruction, and then it takes a few weeks to kind of get fluent at a slow pace. I learned that there were no limits to achievement educationally, that there was easy communication in the family and the native language of the family. I mean, it just basically made my Rachel's father and I, we just felt totally like the weight of the world was taken off our shoulders. We were excited. We treated ourselves to an expensive dinner out after that. I mean, that was just happiness. It was hope.
Wow, that's beautiful. So when it turned to Rachel, you were just a child. Tell us, what were your earliest memories of learning cued speech, and how do you remember feeling about learning cued speech?
So my earliest memory of cued speech was when I had a cued speech transliterator in my kindergarten and my first grade classroom. I was mainstreamed at a public school, and even though I had been cueing since I was a toddler, that was my first memory of cued speech because it stood out in a classroom full of children who did not use cued speech. And cued speech was just such a natural part of my life and my family, and I had no memory of struggling or having any barrier to communication. So cued speech didn't really stand out to me as something unique until I was in that classroom. I first learned the system myself when I was in second grade because I attended Alexander Graham Bell Montessori School, and there were other deaf children in the classroom who used cued speech. And it was my first year attending the school, and I wanted to communicate with them. So even though I have been using this since I was a toddler, I just naturally preferred to express myself through spoken language. So I actually had to learn how to use the system myself expressively in second grade for the first time. And I just remember feeling happy and relieved that I could communicate with my friends in my native language, which was spoken English.
That's wonderful. So, Rachel, when you were in school and you had a cute speech transliterator, were the children around you also using cute speech when they communicated with you?
So when I attended Alexander Graham Bell Montessori School, or AGBMS for short, key speech was completely immersed into the classroom. So that meant the teachers used cue speech and the other deaf children used cue speech. We did not pressure hearing children to learn cue speech, but many of them chose to learn cue speech even though they were very young like ourselves because they wanted to communicate with their deaf peers. When I was mainstreamed in kindergarten, first grade, and middle and high school, I had a few hearing friends who chose to learn cue speech. Even though I had a cue speech transliterator in the classroom, they were so fascinated with the system, and they actually went on and grew up to become speech language pathologists, and they work with deaf children today.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I'm going to turn back to Sandy. So Sandy, you had started learning sign language before you learned cute speech. And I'm just curious, what were benefits that you experienced using cute speech over sign language? And I know sign language, of course, has benefits too. So tell us more about the benefits that you experienced while you chose to use cute speech.
Well, this brings up like an important point that I wanted to make sure I made during this session, and that is that we're not choosing between cute speech and American Sign Language. Actually, in our family, we advocated for bilingualism, and we wanted our daughter to be proficient in American Sign Language as well as cute speech. But what we really needed to do is focus on the cueing until Rachel became proficient in English and what they call safe for reading. You have to know 7,000 to 10,000 words, according to what I was told as a young parent in that first seminar about cute speech, that we needed to really focus on the cueing and set the sign language aside for a time until Rachel was proficient in English. And then we could add back the sign language by introducing it through a native signer, like a sign language tutor. And that's exactly what we did. So by the time Rachel was 5, she was completely age appropriate in English. She was actually reading at about the second grade level, and we decided to hire a signing tutor and have her learn to sign. But in terms of your question about why someone would use cueing over sign language, I would answer only for conveying English proficiency. That was the whole point, that you use it to convey English. So basically, it gives you the advantage of communicating in the native language of the home. All of the family, all of the friends, she's learning English. She can communicate with them in English. It gave her age appropriate language and literacy. That's not what sign language is for. Sign language is for communication and for conveying deaf culture, and so they both have their purposes, and we appreciate them for what they're good for.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Sandy, because I think the challenge is, as I learned from you, that there is politics within the deaf community. And some people feel they have to choose just sign language or just cueing. But as you say, it doesn't have to be both. They're both important. And I want to ask Rachel, how have both of those modes of communication been helpful to you, if you can remember back to when you learned sign language?
Could you repeat the question? How
Sure.
did they?
Sorry. How has it been important for you to know both cued speech and sign language?
So it's a I always had a very strong sense of deaf identity. My mom tells the story of when I was 4 years old, I was attending two preschools. One was a hearing preschool and one was a deaf preschool. And eventually I told my mom, I'm 4, I'm deaf, and I want to go to the deaf preschool. So even from a very young age, I always identified and recognized that I was deaf. So I wanted to learn sign language, and I wanted to always have that bridge to the deaf world and the deaf community. And so that's why sign language was so important to me. It's also important because it gave me a chance to participate in deaf theater and the deaf arts. And I got to attend a deaf college, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf and Rochester Institute of Technology. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Then Q speech was life changing for me because I didn't have any limits. Sign language, with sign language, I had access to the deaf community, but with Q speech, I was able to have access to the language of academia, the language of the working world. So I was the language of school. So I was able to become a fairly self-actualized adult who was able to participate in both school, in the deaf community, in the working world. I was able to date both deaf and hearing men.
That's
So,
important.
yeah,
So,
that's important. I'm just kidding.
So I want to ask you a question that I hadn't put on a list ahead of time. So is your husband hearing, and I'm just curious, how did you meet him? If you don't mind sharing.
So my husband is hearing. My first boyfriend was deaf. When I met my husband, I was working in Colorado Springs for the Defense Logistics Agency. They had a workforce recruitment program for people with disabilities, and I was renting a room from a friend of his, and he came over to change his coat oil, and he introduced himself to me, and we actually have a little joke because at the time he didn't know how to cue or sign. So when he introduced himself, he used his nickname Mac. So he said, "Hi, my name is Mac," because his last name is McNallen. And being deaf, I thought he said, "Hi, my name is Max." So for that whole day, I was calling him Max, but he was like, "Okay, I'm cool with that. She wants to talk to me. I'm fine with her calling me Max."
And how did you understand him? Did you have a hearing aid at the time? Were you
Yes,
doing lip reading?
I
So,
was doing both. I was lip reading and I was using my hearing aid and my cochlear implant. And, I was able to understand him. But as we progressed in our relationship, I told him about how important having full access to English was to me and how important it was to me that I could take off my hearing aid and my cochlear implant sometime, like if I was in the shower or if I was just waking up in the morning. Sometimes we could just have a cup of coffee and he could cue to me and talk to me in English without me having to put in my hearing aid and cochlear implant right away.
wow. Yeah, I don't think people realize that you do take off a cochlear implant sometimes, right?
Yes,
That's something.
A
So
lot
that
of
way you
times.
can always be understood and you can understand what he's saying through cueing.
that's correct.
So I'm going to turn back to Sandy. Sandy, you mentioned some of the benefits of cued speech. Can you elaborate more on the benefits that cued speech has made to you and your whole family?
Well, the most immediate benefit to any family is it opens up communication, easy communication in your native spoken language. So within, like I said, a few weeks of learning it, you're basically able to communicate in your own language with your own child. So you get to develop normal family relationships, normal developmental milestones. Like I remember I used to go to conventions, AG Bell convention, and they had all these workshops on like how to work with your deaf child on potty training, how to work with your deaf child on discipline problems. And And I'd be like, well, I don't have to know that. I don't have, you know, because with the cueing and the easy communication, you tend to not have those issues. You work on potty training the way anybody works on potty training, you know. So family relationships, you know, just growing up and raising your child in the way you would raise a hearing child, but also the main, you know, lasting benefits are age-appropriate language and literacy and unlimited academic potential. And then there's benefits that Dr. Cornett, the inventor of cued speech, didn't even anticipate or plan for, which are because cued speech creates a phonological model of the entire spoken language in the brain of the child. You're basically you're able to develop better speech and listening skills because you know exactly what you're trying to say. The target is clear. You know every sound and every word that you're trying to say as a deaf child or a deaf adult, and the same with listening. You're able to make better use of your implant or your hearing aids because the sound of the sounds of the language, the phonology of the language is you've mastered it. It's how you learn the language. Cued speech is all phoneme based. You cue phonemes.
Right.
And just let me say one more thing, because this is something that's very, very important. The whole world doesn't cue. Like a lot of people will say, well, why use cued speech? Because sign language is more well-known than cued speech. And how will your daughter be able to communicate with the normal, you know, the rest of the world? Well, in spoken English, because it prepares, it creates expertise in English. She mastered English. And so then with very little hearing or with whatever hearing a child is able to have with their implant or hearing aid, and nowadays they have a lot of hearing with implants, but it's not perfect hearing, but they know English. And so they can function in conversational, you know, speech with people that don't cue because they fill in, you know, the blanks, what they're not seeing with their eyes on the mouth, or hearing. They already have the language mastered and they can kind of put it all together.
Oh, that makes sense. Yes, go ahead, Rachel.
I just wanted to interject. With my hearing aid, I could discriminate only about 33% of English sounds with no visual access. However, with cueing, I was able to understand close to 100% of conversational English because, like my mom said, I had a knowledge of the language, so I knew what to expect in the normal course of conversation. So,
right, and you also knew the same grammar and sentence structure as a hearing person, correct?
mm-hmm.
You know, you told me earlier that you have a job, I want to just touch on this, that you probably could never have gotten if you didn't know how to speak English well and do cued speech. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your job and why it's, you know, unique?
Yes, so I work in environmental engineering and compliance. I also work in civil engineering, so a lot of my job requires me to read engineering drawings and understand calculations and interpret laws. So environmental laws, environmental regulations. I have to read the actual statutes and understand the legal documents associated with that and interpret the law. And without a mastery of English, it would have been much more difficult for me to gain that proficiency to understand legal documents and to learn math and science because they have their unique vocabularies, especially in engineering. There's a whole other world of unique vocabulary, and it would be harder to access that vocabulary if I didn't have a way to access spoken English.
Wow. What is your degree in specifically?
My degree is in environmental technology, and I have a Master of Science degree in environmental health and safety management.
Wow, that's very impressive. Very. So, you know, you all right now are on the verge of a major technological breakthrough through Q College. And Sandy, I believe this was your initiative, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd like you to share with our audience what they can do right now to be able to learn cued speech through your new online program. Tell us about Q College.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to also give credit to my co-visionary on the project, Aaron Rose, who is also deaf himself, a deaf young adult, and a teacher of the deaf, and very technically competent. And it was both of our vision to create an online university where people, because cued speech is several years ago, it was only used by maybe 2 or 3% of deaf children. Now, I think the last he heard at a conference he was just at, it's up to 12%. And one of the reasons it's growing is because we started a program at the Illinois School for the Deaf where they added in cued speech, and they went from like a 2 or 3 month average academic gain in an academic year to like 1, 2, 3, 4 years gain in 1 year.
Wow.
While the children are catching up. And so anyway, there is a very critical need to spread the use of cued speech on a wider basis. And there's limited resources for teaching it and passing it along. There's like pockets of people that are experts in, teaching cueing and cued language transliteration and training instructors in cued speech and so on, and best practices and using it like in speech and language therapy. So what we did is we created a website that's basically a platform where there's a learning management system called Canvas. They use it in lots of online colleges. And we're using that to create courses to teach people cued speech, and they're accessible to the masses, even worldwide. And then we also have a Q store on the website. It's called qcollege.org. That's the name of the website. Our first course is actually already up and running. We launched the website a couple of months ago. Our first course is called Cued Speech 100, and it's basically 14 lessons where all of the hand shapes, all the sounds of English are taught. And there are like over 900 video-based activities that once you complete all 14 lessons, you should know the entire system expressively. We're also about to add like live cue tutoring and some interactive learning. So just keep your eyes open and watch for more to come on the website. And we're actively seeking collaborators to help us create more courses and products.
Wow. This is, for everyone listening, this is really a major accomplishment. Cued speech, as I've been told, is really all around the world, but as Sandy said, it's not widespread. It's been around for, is it 50 years now, Sandy?
Yeah, it was created in 1966 originally by Dr. Orrin Cornett.
Right. But most people, I would imagine, still have not heard of cued speech in this country. So Sandy and her collaborator, Aaron, have taken it upon themselves to help spread the word, right, about cued speech. And in fact, they're going to be giving you a gift at the end of this program, which we will share with you a link where you can learn all the cued speech hand shapes. So if you have a pen, you'll want to write down Q, C-U-E, college, COLLEGE.org. And we're going to go to those closing slides with everyone's acknowledgments and this information for you. But first, I just want to ask Sandy and Rachel, we'll start with Rachel this time, for some closing comments on what would be a final message you would give to someone who is either has deafness, hearing loss, or family member about why they should consider using cued speech to better communicate. So Rachel, let's start with you. What's a final message?
My final message is that you want to give your family member the best of both worlds. You want to give them unlimited opportunity and access. Like my mom said, you don't have to choose between, or among the very fractured methodologies or modes of communications out there. You can use whatever works best for your family member. Sorry, that's my son. So that's my final message.
Great. So you don't have to choose. That's a good message. Sandy.
What she said. There's even a book called Choices in Deafness, and it's just like the wrong message. The message is, Rachel and I were talking yesterday, would you ever find a deaf child who grew up with, great technology? They could hear the best they possibly could, and cueing, so they had great language skills and reading skills, and signing so they could be part of the deaf community. Do you think they would ever say to their mother, why, or their father, sorry, why did you teach me all these things?
That's
you should have
right.
picked one. You should have
Exactly.
been honest.
That's right.
No, we have to do it all. So
Exactly.
that's the message, yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to turn to our closing slides here. We want to first give a big thanks, yay, to Sandy Mostick and Rachel McAnallen. Also, if you want to learn more, you can turn Roland learn more about cueing. We can go to Lisa Gavin has a company, Cue for You, a transliterating service, and you can see her in the box below at the bottom of this frame. Q4UCLT@gmail.com is her email address. So you can hire Lisa to help you in doing transliterating. Then, Roland, will you turn to our next slide? I want to a big thank you to Josh Garrett for coming in to help us as our American Sign Language interpreter from ACS, Alternative Communication Services. And next slide, Roland. If you want to learn more about the only Montessori school mainstreaming deaf and hearing children through cute speech, you can go to agbms.org. Those are the logos on the bottom. And finally, Roland, can we turn? We also want to know the place to go to learn cute speech online. This is a major breakthrough in technology. cuecollege.org. It's up there right now. And if you're willing to help support this cause, please get in touch with Sandy Mostick through cuecollege.org. And last, the gift that Sandy and Rachel are giving you, you can learn to do cued speech easily, and there's a hand-shaped chart. If you remember, Sandy mentioned 8 hand shapes for all consonants and 4 positions around the mouth for all vowels. So you can go to this link, and that link is also on this interview page. It's posted there, so you can click on it and learn more. So I want to thank you all again for listening. We have more exciting interviews coming up at Difference Makers Media. Thank you so much. Feel free to type in comments or questions even after the show. I didn't see anyone making any comments yet, but we are very happy to come back and answer them. Keep on making a difference. We are so glad you're here. Thank you again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.